You never forget the sound of a world collapsing. For me, it wasn't an earthquake or a gunshot. It was the soft slide of a paper across a desk. That faint scrape on cheap laminate will echo in my head until the day I die. I was sitting in a cramped office that smelled faintly of stale coffee and lemon disinfectant, the kind of room that looked like it had been assembled from a clearance sale at a furniture warehouse. The fluorescent light above flickered every few seconds, buzzing like an angry bee, and I remember thinking it was ridiculous that $1 billion corporation couldn't even replace a light bulb. But then again, maybe that buzzing was the perfect soundtrack to what was about to happen. Across from me sat Cynthia from HR, her face arranged into that neutral expression they must teach in corporate training, part sympathetic, part cold efficiency. Beside her was Richard Porter, the regional director shipped in from headquarters. Richard always wore suits a little too sharp, watches a little too flashy, smiles that never reached his eyes. His cufflinks gleamed like tiny mirrors as he folded his hands, as if reflecting back the discomfort of everyone in the room. "Eleanor," Cynthia said, her voice slow and deliberate, "we've been reviewing compensation packages. Based on market conditions and the restructuring process, your role will be subject to adjustment." And then it happened, that slip of paper. My name typed neatly at the top, followed by numbers that gutted me more than any knife ever could. My salary slashed by 60%, 130,000 reduced to barely scraping above 50. I felt the air thicken, like my lungs had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. My ears buzzed as though stuffed with cotton. All I could hear was the frantic thud of my own heartbeat. For a wild moment, I thought maybe I was hallucinating, that if I blinked, the number would change. But no, it stayed there, black ink on white paper, a weapon disguised as an offer. Richard leaned forward, his Rolex catching the light. "This reflects the evolving nature of your position," he said, voice dripping with the kind of smug condescension that made my skin crawl. "You'll continue with your responsibilities during the transition?" Of course. Of course. I don't know what possessed me in that moment. Maybe instinct. Maybe years of learning how to survive by keeping my emotions locked behind a mask. I smiled. Actually smiled. "I'll need 24 hours to consider," I heard myself say, the words hollow, robotic, like I was watching someone else perform a script. Cynthia exhaled in relief, like she'd been bracing for me to scream. Richard looked pleased, probably congratulating himself for how smooth this execution had gone. I gathered the paper, nodded politely, and stood on legs that trembled like glass. The next thing I remember clearly is sitting in my car in the underground parking garage, the fluorescent light above the windshield buzzing just like the one in Cynthia's office. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked. My reflection stared back from the dark screen of the GPS, mascara already smudged. That's when the dam broke. I sobbed, loud, raw, ugly sounds that shook my whole body. Tears blurred the dashboard, smeared down my cheeks, dripped onto my blouse. My chest heaved so violently it fogged the windows, and in that suffocating box of metal and glass, I let 9 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and exhaustion spill out in rivers of grief. 9 years. That's what I had given them. 9 years of missed birthdays, of rushing out the door before sunrise and stumbling back home long after my son Lucas was asleep. 9 years of telling myself it was worth it, that every sacrifice was for his future. And in return, they told me I was worth less than half of what I had been yesterday. Somewhere in the storm of tears, a thought emerged, jagged and sharp. How do you explain this to a 10-year-old boy who still believes his mother can protect him from anything? I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and whispered, God, please don't let me break. Not now. But I was already breaking. That was the moment the story truly began. Not with the paper, not with Richard's smug little speech, but with me alone in that car, mascara streaked and chest aching, realizing the foundation of my life had been ripped out from beneath me. I didn't know it yet, but what I thought was the end of everything was about to become the start of something else, something I could never have imagined. People think the hardest part of betrayal is the moment it happens, the slap in the face, the gut punch, the shock of it all. But that's not true. The hardest part is the silence that follows, the long, suffocating hours where you're left alone with the echo of it, turning it over in your mind until it cuts deeper and deeper. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of the streetlight leaking through the blinds, slicing my room into harsh bands of light and shadow. My son Lucas slept down the hall, breathing softly, the rise and fall of his chest as steady as the ticking of a clock. For him, the world was still intact. For me, it had already fallen apart. At around 2 a.m, I went into the bathroom and closed the door. The mirror showed a stranger, red eyes swollen from crying, hair tangled, shoulders slumped. I turned on the tap just to drown out the sound of my own shallow breaths. And then the panic hit, a tight, crushing weight in my chest, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would wake Lucas. I gripped the edge of the sink, trying to force myself to breathe. I'd been through heartbreak before. When Lucas's father walked out, when I signed the divorce papers, when I realized I'd be raising a child alone. But this was different. This wasn't just personal betrayal, it was systemic. Cold, calculated. They hadn't cared enough even to pretend I mattered. The first trauma wasn't the pay cut. It was the realization that I'd been naive, that all those years I thought loyalty meant something. I was just another number on a spreadsheet, disposable, replaceable, and that knowledge burned hotter than anger. It hollowed me out. The next morning I tried to hide it. I made Lucas pancakes, smiling when he told me about a science fair project he wanted to start. I nodded, laughed even, but inside every word he spoke was a knife. Because while he was dreaming of volcano models and ribbons, I was calculating whether I could keep paying the mortgage, the electricity, his asthma medication. I drove him to school and sat in the parking lot afterward, staring at the families around me, couples holding hands, mothers in yoga pants sipping coffee from travel mugs, fathers dropping their kids off before heading to jobs where they were still respected. I wondered how many of them had their own papers waiting, their own Cynthia and Richard ready to smile and destroy. When I finally went back to the office, people looked at me strangely. Maybe I looked pale, maybe my smile was too tight. My team noticed though. Maria asked if I was okay. Devin hovered by my desk, his eyes wide with worry. I brushed them off, told them I was fine. But I wasn't fine. I was unraveling. The trauma came in waves, sitting in meetings where words blurred into static, opening emails and forgetting what I was supposed to reply. Lucas calling me from school to ask if I'd be at his soccer game, and me lying, saying I'd try. By Friday, the weight had become unbearable. I parked in the garage again, just like that first day, and the crying started all over. It wasn't a gentle trickle of tears. It was violent, full-body sobs that shook me so hard I thought I might break apart completely. My chest ached, my throat burned, my mascara smeared until I looked like a ghost of myself. And then the darker thoughts crept in. What if I couldn't recover? What if I couldn't keep the house or provide for Lucas or even keep him safe? What if I lost him, my reason for everything, because I wasn't strong enough? I pressed my palms to my eyes. whispering over and over, "Hold it together, hold it together." But each time the words rang emptier. That was the trauma no one saw. Not Cynthia with her rehearsed lines, not Richard with his smug watch, not even my team who suspected but didn't know. The real breaking happened in secret, in cars and bathrooms, in the space between pretending to be strong and admitting you're terrified. It's strange, looking back. That silent breakdown felt like weakness at the time, but in truth, it was the first crack in the shell I'd built around myself. The shell of obedience, of corporate loyalty, of believing that if I just worked hard enough, I'd be safe. The crack hurt, but it also let in light. I didn't know it yet, but that night in the car, sobbing until my body shook, was the first step toward something else, something bigger, something that would turn all that pain into power. I should probably tell you who the players in this story really are. The ones who pulled the strings, the ones who smiled while cutting me open, and the ones who unknowingly kept me alive when I was ready to give up. Because no revenge story exists in a vacuum. It's built on people, choices, betrayals, and the bonds that tether us to hope even in the darkest nights. Let's start with Lucas, my son. 10 years old, wide-eyed, serious for his age, with this uncanny ability to read my moods, even when I tried to hide them. He had asthma, bad enough that every wheeze sent lightning bolts of panic through me. His inhaler was never far, sitting like a silent sentinel on his nightstand. Lucas wasn't just my child, he was my anchor. Everything I did, every sacrifice, every late night, every tear I swallowed was for him. Then there was Jacob, my ex-husband. He had decided somewhere along the way that fatherhood was too heavy a coat to wear. He said marriage suffocated him, that he was meant for freedom, adventure, finding himself. I later found out himself came packaged with a yoga instructor named Sierra and a new life in Austin. He visited Lucas when it was convenient, dropped in with gifts that shone bright for a weekend, then vanished again, leaving me to pick up the pieces. I stopped waiting for him to be dependable. But his absence cut deep. It meant I was alone in every battle. And then there were the corporate faces. Richard Porter, the shark in an expensive suit. If arrogance had a perfume, he wore it. He had been sent by Martech headquarters with one mission: cut costs. To him, people weren't people, they were expenses to trim. I was just a line item, an overpaid cog he could downsize while polishing his Rolex. Cynthia Myers, HR. She played her role like a well-trained actress. Calm voice, sympathetic tilt of the head, phrases that pretended to be gentle but carried knives in their lining. I don't know if she believed what she said. Maybe she was just surviving, too. But she became the face of the betrayal, the one who handed me the paper that ended my career. And then there was the ghost of someone who wasn't in the room anymore. Vernon Hale, the founder of the company before the acquisition. I had joined when it was still Hale Solutions, back when Vernon promised we were building something revolutionary. He was the kind of leader who remembered birthdays, who brought in donuts on Fridays, who told us we were a family. For years, I believed him. Until the day I watched him sell us out to Martech for $3 million and walk away without looking back. These were the villains. But they weren't the whole story, because standing beside me, or at least quietly rooting for me, were the remnants of my team. Maria, a whip-smart account manager who juggled client demands with grace, even as the company squeezed her tighter and tighter. Devin, barely 30, expecting his first child, terrified of losing everything but still showing up every morning with determination written across his tired face. Priya, soft-spoken but fierce in her loyalty, holding things together when it felt like everything was falling apart. I introduced them to clients as my team, but the truth was they were my family too. We had bled together in late-night meetings, covered for each other when panic attacks hit, celebrated tiny wins with pizza in the break room. They weren't just colleagues, they were survivors of the same battlefield. So when I sat in that car, clutching the paper that told me I was worth less than half of what I used to be, I wasn't just thinking about Lucas and me. I was thinking about Maria, who couldn't afford another layoff, about Devon, whose baby would need diapers and formula, about Priya, who whispered once over coffee that her work visa depended on her job. This was the cast of my story: family that left, family that stayed, colleagues who became kin, and executives who saw us all as replaceable. It's important you know them, because revenge isn't abstract, it's not faceless. It's a story of names and people, of those who break you and those who hold you just enough to keep you from shattering completely. And at the center of all of it was me, Eleanor Reeves, 36 years old, single mum, survivor, director of client solutions, or at least I had been. A woman whose worth had been signed away with the stroke of a pen by people who didn't know the first thing about loyalty, sacrifice, or love. But they were going to learn. There's a point in every downfall when the floor finally gives way, when the free fall stops feeling temporary and becomes a terrifying kind of permanence. That was where I found myself, dangling over the edge of ruin, staring down at the jagged rocks of fear, humiliation, and despair. At first I told myself I could handle it, that I just needed to breathe, to think logically, to find another job before the pay cut took effect. But reality doesn't work like a spreadsheet. Reality is bills stacked on the kitchen counter, the mortgage company leaving polite but insistent voicemails, the pharmacy calling to remind me Lucas's inhaler refill was ready. And no, insurance wouldn't cover it until I paid the outstanding balance. Nights became the worst. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Lucas breathe through the thin walls of our modest house, wondering how long I could keep pretending everything was fine. My heart hammered so hard some nights I was convinced I wouldn't wake up the next morning. The thought of leaving Lucas alone in this world like that was enough to make me sit up, gasping, gripping the edge of the bed like I could keep myself alive through sheer stubbornness. One night, around 3 a.m, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of me like a war map. Electricity, gas, mortgage, credit card, medical. Numbers stared back like soldiers marching toward me. I added them up over and over, as though the math might change if I pressed my pencil hard enough into the paper. It never did. Every calculation ended the same. Impossible. I started drinking too much coffee during the day just to keep moving. By night, I downed cheap wine, hoping it would quiet the panic enough to let me sleep. It didn't. All it did was leave me groggy the next morning, fumbling through meetings while pretending to care about clients whose contracts no longer felt like lifelines but like chains binding me to a sinking ship. The worst moment came one Thursday evening. Lucas had a soccer game, and I had promised him I'd be there. I'd sworn it. He'd looked at me with those serious brown eyes and said, "Promise, Mom?" And I had nodded, meaning it with all my heart. But that afternoon, Richard scheduled a mandatory alignment session. That's corporate speak for sit here and listen while we remind you we own you. By the time it ended, I was too late. When I pulled up to the field, the lights were off, the kids were gone. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves in the evening wind. I sat in the empty parking lot staring at the dark field, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. And I realized I'd missed yet another piece of my son's childhood, not because of an accident, not because of an emergency, but because a man with a Rolex and a smirk wanted to flex his power. I cried so hard that night Lucas came into the kitchen and found me. He was still in his little uniform, grass stains on his knees, holding his water bottle. "Why are you crying, Mom?" he asked, his voice small. I wiped my face and tried to smile, but kids know. They always know. He wrapped his arms around me, his head pressing into my chest, and whispered, "It's okay. You'll come next time." But I knew the truth. Next time would come, and the company would take that from me too. That was rock bottom. Not the bills, not the sleepless nights, not even the panic attacks in bathroom stalls between meetings. No, rock bottom was realizing I was becoming a ghost in my own life, an empty shell of a mother, a woman so beaten down she couldn't even keep a simple promise to the one person who loved her unconditionally. I thought about quitting without a plan, walking out and never looking back, but fear held me. Fear of losing the house, fear of failing Lucas, fear of never finding my footing again. For weeks, I lived in that shadow place, dragging myself through days, collapsing at night, pretending to everyone, especially to Lucas, that I still had control. But sometimes, when you're buried that deep, the smallest flicker of light can change everything. At my lowest, when I believed I had no choices left, that flicker was about to arrive. When the phone rang that night, I almost didn't answer. I was sitting on the couch, bills spread out like fallen leaves, the glow of the TV casting shadows on the walls, but I couldn't focus on anything. Lucas was asleep, his science project half finished on the kitchen table. My head throbbed from another round of numbers that refused to add up. So when the phone buzzed in my hand, I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something made me swipe. Maybe instinct, maybe fate. "Ellie?" a familiar voice asked. It took me a second. "Kira?" "Yes, finally. I've been trying to reach you all week. Haven't you checked your LinkedIn messages?" I laughed bitterly. "Kira, I barely check my email anymore, let alone LinkedIn." There was a pause, then her voice dropped, urgent. "Listen, I'm Advantage Tech now. You know, Martech's biggest competitor. My boss has been asking about you. We need someone who knows the clients like you do. Someone who can step in, take charge. You would be perfect." Her words jolted through me like electricity. For months I'd been shrinking, folding in on myself, suffocating under fear. But in that moment, a window cracked open, a possibility, a spark. Still, doubt was my first response. "Kira, I can't. If Martech finds out I'm even talking to a competitor..." "They already cut your salary by 60%, Ellie," she interrupted. "They've shown you what you're worth to them. What do you owe them anymore?" Her bluntness stung because it was true. I thought about Richard's smirk, about Cynthia's carefully neutral face, about that piece of paper sliding across the desk. I thought about Lucas in his soccer uniform whispering, "It's okay, Mom. You'll come next time." "What exactly are you offering?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. That's when Kira said the name that changed everything. "Cameron Reed. The CEO wants to meet you tomorrow morning, before you have to give Martech your answer." For a moment, the room tilted. The CEO of Vantage Tech wanted to meet me. Me, the woman sobbing in her car, barely keeping her life together. But then another thought surged. Maybe that's not who I am anymore. Maybe they see something I've forgotten. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the stack of bills, at the silent glow of the TV, at Lucas's inhaler on the coffee table. For the first time in months, the crushing weight in my chest loosened just a little. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I opened my laptop and dug out everything I had. Notes, contacts, years of relationship details I'd built with my clients. Who to call when contracts stalled, which CTOs were considering upgrades, which executives were quietly frustrated with the Martech's streamlining. Information that wasn't confidential, but was priceless. As I scrolled through names and numbers, I realized something. I wasn't powerless. I had value. Not because of a title or a paycheck, but because of the trust I had built, the years I had given, the relationships that lived in my memory and my notes, that couldn't be cut with a piece of paper. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I dressed in my best suit, the one I usually saved for closing big deals. I did my hair, my makeup, every detail perfect. Not for Richard, not for Cynthia, but for me, for the woman who had been crushed but wasn't going to stay down. I dropped Lucas at school, hugged him longer than usual, and told him I loved him. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "I will be," I said. And for the first time in months, I meant it. The West Side Cafe was quiet when I walked in at 7:30 sharp. Cameron Reed was waiting, tall, silver at the temples, dressed casually, but with an ease that radiated authority. Kira sat beside him, smiling, urging me forward with her eyes. "Eleanor Reeves," Cameron said, standing to shake my hand. "I've heard a lot about you." And in that moment, something shifted. I wasn't a broken woman begging for scraps. I wasn't disposable. I was someone worth noticing, someone worth recruiting, someone who had the power to choose. That was the spark. The beginning of my transformation. When you decide to change your life, you don't shout it from the rooftops. Not at first. Transformation, at least the kind that lasts, begins in silence, in shadows. I walked out of that cafe with Cameron Reed's offer letter heavy in my bag, and I knew that every step I took from then on had to be careful, deliberate, precise. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not Lucas, not Maria, not Devon or Priya, not even my sister, who usually knew everything. Instead, I went home, closed the blinds, and spread my old employment contract across the kitchen table like it was a map to freedom. My hands trembled as I read every line, looking for traps, for any fine print that might tether me to Martech. And then there it was. Or rather, the absence of it, no non-compete clause. When I had joined years earlier, back when the company was still Hale Solutions, Vernon hadn't bothered with the contracts that restricted us. He'd said, if we treat people right, they'll never want to leave. That clause had saved me. It was his one gift that still mattered. Their mistake, my opportunity. I stayed up all night that evening, combing through my files. Not the official company CRM, that was theirs, but my notes, my handwritten binders, my personal spreadsheets, the emails I had printed and tucked away because I never trusted digital systems entirely. 9 years of relationships catalogued in detail, which clients hated early morning calls, who preferred in-person over Zoom, or which contracts were vulnerable, which ones had whispered frustrations about Martech's service. It wasn't theft. It was memory, skill, trust, and it belonged to me. The next morning, I walked into the office like nothing had changed. I sat at my desk, answered emails, joined calls. Richard passed by with his shark smile, and I smiled back. Cynthia waved from HR, and I nodded politely. They thought they had gutted me. They thought I was bleeding out quietly. They had no idea I was already planning my resurrection. Every interaction became double-layered. Outwardly, I was the same steady director, pushing projects forward, reassuring nervous clients, managing what was left of my team. Inwardly, I was taking notes, memorizing timelines, listening for cracks in the foundation. Every synergy initiative, every efficiency drive was another shovel digging Martech's grave. I became someone else in those weeks, someone sharper, colder. Focused in a way I'd never been before, because it wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about strategy. I started meeting Kira in secret, late dinners at quiet restaurants, quick coffee catch-ups, where she slid documents across the table the way Cynthia had once slid that cursed paper. Only this time, the numbers filled me with hope instead of dread. Cameron called me directly more than once. His voice was steady, direct, the kind of leader who didn't waste words. "We value people who can carry relationships," he told me. "You've been carrying them for years. It's time you were rewarded for it." Each time my spine straightened a little more, and still I told no one. Because part of revenge isn't just winning, it's the reveal. The moment when the mask comes off and the people who thought they owned you realize you were playing a different game all along. At night, after Lucas was asleep, I practiced my composure in the mirror. No more tears. No more shaking. I rehearsed the words I would one day say to Richard, to Cynthia, maybe even to Gerald Martech himself, if he dared call me. I whispered them until they tasted like steel in my mouth. I quit. I wasn't naive. I knew the risk. I knew they'd threaten lawsuits, whisper rumors, maybe even try to bury me in court. But I also knew something they had forgotten. Power doesn't only come from contracts and titles, it comes from conviction, and I had finally found mine again. The day Cynthia scheduled a touch-base meeting, my heart raced. I knew what was coming. Richard would be there, of course, his Rolex glinting, his voice smug. They'd expect me to fold, to sign, to take their crumbs with gratitude. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I was no longer their employee in spirit. I was already gone. I had already crossed the line. That was my secret return. I was back, yes, but not as their obedient soldier. I was back as the storm they never saw coming. The morning of the confrontation, I woke before dawn. The sky outside my bedroom window was still ink black, the world hushed, like it was holding its breath for me. I dressed carefully, my best suit, the one I'd once saved for boardroom presentations and contract signings. Today it was armor. My hair sleek, my makeup flawless, every detail sharpened until I looked like a weapon forged in fire. When I dropped Lucas at school, he tilted his head, studying me with that quiet seriousness of his. "You look different, Mom," he said. "I feel different," I told him, kissing the top of his head. By the time I walked into the Martech office, my pulse was steady, my heels clicking against the sterile tile floor like war drums. People glanced up from their cubicles, sensing something in the air. Maria raised her eyebrows in silent question. Devin looked like he wanted to ask if I was okay, but I gave them both a small smile that said, "May wait and see." Cynthia was waiting outside the conference room, her face tight. "Thanks for being on time, Eleanor," she said, as though punctuality mattered more than the fact they were about to slice my life apart. Inside, Richard Porter was already seated at the head of the table, his Rolex flashing as he adjusted his cufflinks. He didn't bother to stand. "Have you reached a decision?" he asked, his voice slick, rehearsed. I sat across from him, folding my hands calmly on the table. "I have some questions first." Richard sighed, theatrically impatient. "We've been very clear. This is a yes or no situation." "Really?" I tilted my head. "Because I manage our 10 largest accounts. I think it's fair to ask who will be handling the Westford implementation next month or the Alder contract renewal in June." Cynthia shifted uncomfortably. Richard waved a hand dismissively. "Those responsibilities will be redistributed. That's not something you need to worry about." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "Actually, it is something I need to worry about, because those clients specifically requested my involvement, and because I've heard rumors you're planning to move client services overseas within 8 months. Is that true?" For the first time, Richard faltered. His confident mask cracked just slightly. Cynthia's eyes dropped to the folder in front of her, the silence louder than any admission. I let the pause stretch until it cut. "So it is true," I said softly. You wanted me to take a 60% pay cut and then train my replacement before you eliminated my job entirely. That's the offer, isn't it? Richard's jaw tightened. This meeting is about your current role, not hypothetical restructuring. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Then my answer is simple. I took a breath, steady and sure. I quit. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Richard blinked, stunned. Excuse me? You heard me, I said, my voice sharp as glass, effective immediately. His smug smile returned, brittle this time. Company policy requires 2 weeks' notice from director-level employees. Check my contract, I countered. The original Hale Solutions contract that was never updated after the acquisition. It states notice periods equal severance periods. Since Hale offered 1 week of severance, that's my required notice. And since your compensation cut exceeds 15%, all transition requirements are void. Richard's face flushed crimson. Cynthia looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. You can't just walk out on your responsibilities, Richard sputtered. Watch me. I stood gathering my bag. At the door, I turned back. Oh, and I've already accepted a position with Vantage Tech. Since Hale never implemented non-competes and Martech never made me sign one, I'll be starting there on Monday. For a heartbeat, silence. Then Richard's voice, low and dangerous. You've just made a serious mistake. We'll review all your communications. If we find even a hint of client poaching or misconduct, we'll bury you in litigation. I met his eyes without flinching. I haven't stolen anything. What I've built, my relationships, my trust, that belongs to me, and I'm taking it with me. I walked out, my heels striking the floor like gunfire. My team, Maria, Devon, and Priya, were waiting at my desk, their faces pale. Is it true? Priya whispered. I nodded. Check your emails in an hour. 9 years of my life fit into one cardboard box. Family photos, Lucas's drawings, the stupid mug that said world's best boss they'd given me as a joke. Security escorted me out like I was a criminal. But this time, I didn't cry. Not in the elevator, not in the lobby, not in the car. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't walking out in shame. I was walking out in power. You never forget the first moment the truth comes out, the moment when the mask you've been forced to wear slips off, and the people who thought they knew you realize they never understood a damn thing. That moment was coming for Richard and Cynthia, but it also came for me in a way, because for the first time in years, I was standing in my full truth. Not broken, not disposable, not small. The hours after I walked out of Martech were a blur. I made 3 phone calls that night, each one like lighting a fuse. The first was to Cameron Reed. I quit, I told him, and the warmth in his voice steadied me. Good, he said. We'll have legal ready. You're safe now. The second was to Vernon Hale, the founder who had sold us out for millions. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding like he was on a beach somewhere. Ellie, everything okay? No, Vernon, it's not. Martech tried to cut my pay by 60%. I quit. And now they're threatening to sue me for taking a job with Vantage Tech. There was silence on the line, then a sharp curse. That's not how the acquisition was supposed to go. But it did, I said coldly, and now they're trying to bury me. What do you need? He asked finally, his voice softer. I need you to remind them of your own words, that you never implemented non-competes because if you didn't treat people well enough to stay, you deserve to lose them. Another pause, then a sigh. I'll call Gerald Martech myself. The third call was the one that changed everything. Sonia West, CTO of Westfield International, our biggest client. Sonia, it's Ellie. I'm not with Martech anymore. What? Her shock was palpable. Where are you going? Vantage Tech. There was another pause, then her voice hardened. Is this because of the acquisition? Service has already been slipping. Yes, I admitted. They removed me from your account without telling you. Her answer was immediate. Send me your new contact information. We need to talk. By the time I picked Lucas up from school, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Clients, colleagues, even Vernon texting to say he'd spoken directly with Gerald. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. The truth was no longer hidden in boardrooms and contracts. It was spilling out, fast, unstoppable. The next evening, my phone rang again. A number I didn't recognize. This is Gerald Martech, the voice said, low and authoritative. I understand we have a situation. My blood ran cold, the CEO himself. Yes, Mr. Martech, I said, steadying my voice. I've received troubling reports from Richard, from Cynthia. They tell me you've been encouraging clients to leave. I haven't, I said, clear and sharp. I informed them I was leaving. That's all. The rest, they decided on their own. And the pay cut? I pressed, unable to stop myself. Did you approve slashing my salary by more than half without explanation? Silence. Then, no, that was not authorized by me or the executive committee. I almost laughed. Well, it happened, and when I refused to accept it, Richard threatened me with litigation. Another silence, heavier this time. What would it take to bring you back, Miss Reeves? The audacity of it stunned me. You can't be serious. I am, he said firmly. Westfield and Alder represent over 20 million in contracts. If they leave, others will follow. We've run the numbers. It would be cheaper to keep you than to lose them. That's when I did laugh. Sharp, bitter. So now I'm worth saving, not because you care about me, but because you can't afford to lose me. Business is business, he replied. No, I said, my voice rising. It's not just business, it's my life, my son's health. 9 years of loyalty that you dismissed without a second thought, and now you call me, not because of how I was treated, but because you're losing money. There was a long pause. Then Gerald asked, genuinely bewildered, What do you want then? I took a breath. I want you to treat the people still there better than you treated me. And I want you to stop threatening to sue me for taking a new job. That's it? After a long silence, Gerald said, No lawsuit, you have my word, and I'll be visiting the regional office next week. The truth was exposed. Their lies, their cruelty, their disregard, it was all unraveling now, faster than they could control. And for once, I wasn't the one breaking under it. They were. The next morning, I walked into Vantage Tech's office, my new office. Not a cubicle, but a real space with a door, with sunlight streaming through the windows. Maria and Devon joined me within 2 weeks. Clients began to follow, not because I asked them, but because trust can't be bought or faked. And as for Martech, the truth had finally caught up to them. Regret has a sound. It's not always loud. It can be the silence after someone realizes they've lost everything, or the stammer in a voice that once dripped with arrogance, or the whispers in a dying office when people finally understand they've been lied to. I heard all of it in the weeks after I left Martech. The first to feel it was Richard Porter. For years, he strutted around like a king in a borrowed crown, barking orders, flashing his Rolex, dismissing anyone who dared question him. But when I walked and when word began spreading that clients were calling me instead of him, his kingdom crumbled. Maria forwarded me an email he sent to the team, frantic, defensive, filled with empty demands about client continuity and transition protocols. It reeked of desperation. Then came the clients. Westfield International was the first. Sonia called me late one evening, her voice sharp with frustration. They sent a new team to handle the implementation. They couldn't even answer basic questions. I told Gerald myself, if they think this is acceptable, we'll move our contract. Within a month, Westfield was signed with Vantage Tech. Older technologies followed soon after, then Briarwood Systems, then Tetracorp. By 6 months, 5 of Martech's top 10 accounts had walked away, without me ever needing to make a single sales pitch. It wasn't revenge. It was gravity. When you rip the foundation out from under people, eventually the whole structure collapses. The ripples spread fast inside the company. Devin called me one night, his voice low but trembling with excitement. "Richard's out," he whispered. They phrased it as pursuing other opportunities, but everyone knows he was fired. I pictured his smug face going blank the moment Gerald told him he was finished. I didn't cheer. But I won't pretend I didn't feel something shift deep in my chest. Justice, maybe. Cynthia left too, not long after. I heard from Priya that she'd broken down in tears during her final week, telling colleagues she never wanted to deliver news like that again. I should have felt sympathy. Maybe once I would have. But the memory of her sliding that paper across the desk without meeting my eyes was too vivid. Regret was hers to live with. And Gerald, the mighty CEO who called me with his cool, calculated voice, he faced his own reckoning. He had promised to review the office. But by then, it was too late. The overseas outsourcing plan was scrapped quietly. Salaries were adjusted upward, but the damage was irreversible. The good people had already left. The clients had already gone. Even Vernon, the founder who sold us out, reached out again. I ran into him at a conference months later. His hair was grayer, his smile more fragile. He hugged me, whispered, "I should have protected you better. I thought Martech would honor their word." For the first time, I saw regret in his eyes, not the kind that's about money or contracts, but the kind that gnaws at you when you realize your choices hurt the people who trusted you most. And then there were the people still at Martech, the ones who had survived the cuts, who stayed because they had no choice. Priya, tied to her visa, called me late one night in tears. "It's empty here now," she whispered. "Everyone's gone. The energy, the hope, it's all gone. We're just waiting for the next axe to fall." Her voice broke, and for a moment, guilt pricked at me. I had escaped. She was still trapped, but regret didn't just belong to them. It belonged to me, too. Because as much as I had fought, as much as I had won, there were things I couldn't get back. Nights I missed with Lucas, soccer games, bedtime stories. The years I spent believing the company would protect me if I gave them everything. That loss still sat heavy in my bones. Yet when I walked through the new halls of Vantage Tech, when my team grew stronger, when clients shook my hand and said, "We trust you, Ellie," I realized something. Regret and revenge can live side by side. Their regret was the price they paid for underestimating me. My regret was the fuel that kept me from ever letting it happen again. The whispers about me spread far beyond Martech. Recruiters called. Articles hinted at a talent exodus tied to my departure. People I barely knew messaged me, thanking me for standing up, for proving that no one had to stay chained to a sinking ship. And Richard, the man who once told me I was lucky to still have a job after the pay cut, I heard he tried to land at another tech firm, but word travels fast in this industry. Nobody wanted the man who had gutted his own people and lost millions in clients. His silence, that was regret's loudest echo. It all came full circle. The empire they tried to strip from me wasn't theirs to take. It was mine all along. And now they were left with ashes while I had built something stronger. If you've ever stood on a quiet hill at dusk, you know the feeling I carried into my new life. The light softening, the air cooling, the world holding its breath as day hands the sky to night. That's how it felt after the dust settled, after the calls and the contracts and the headlines and the departures. I wasn't triumphant so much as awake to who I was, to what mattered, to what I would never again bargain away. On a Saturday morning, months after the last of my former clients moved their business to Vantage Tech, I found Lucas at the kitchen table, bent over a sketchbook. He was drawing a lung, bronchi like branching trees, tiny alveoli like clusters of grapes, and labeling them in careful block letters. When he looked up, he grinned that serious little grin of his. "Science fair practice," he said. "I'm going to explain how air becomes energy." I poured coffee and watched him for a while, feeling a gratitude so bright it almost hurt. "You know," I told him, "you and I are not that different. We both learned how to turn air into energy, breath into momentum." He wasn't sure what I meant, but one day he will. One day he'll know that his mother rebuilt her life, one breath at a time. Inhale, sigh, exhale, act. But here's the truth I didn't understand until the end. Revenge isn't an explosion, it's architecture. It's the quiet drafting of a new structure while the old one collapses under its own arrogance. Revenge is not the moment you slam the door. It's the morning you wake and realize you no longer think about the people on the other side. There were echoes, of course. Regret leaves them. One afternoon, I ran into Cynthia on a sidewalk outside a downtown cafe. She looked smaller somehow, like a person who'd been shrinking herself to fit inside a job that didn't deserve her. We both froze, then she said, "Eleanor, I'm sorry." The words trembled. I thought I was doing what I had to do. Now I know I was doing what I was told. I held her gaze. "Those aren't always the same thing," I said. I didn't hug her. I didn't slap her. I let the sentence hang between us like a bridge she could choose to cross. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a prize you hand out. It's a door you keep unlocked for your own sanity. Richard never called, but I heard through the soft lattice of industry gossip that he'd been interviewing for months without luck. Eventually, he tried consulting, advising startups on cost optimization. He reached out to one of my clients. They declined. Not because I told them to, because reputations are a kind of math even the slickest resume can't massage. People remember who defended value and who mistook cruelty for courage. Vernon and I met again at a conference where the carpet felt like walking on damp bread and the coffee tasted like scorched apologies. He found me in a hallway, eyes misty. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "about what you said, about treating people so well they never want to leave. I failed at that in the end." He looked at the badge hanging from his lanyard, like it weighed more than it should. "I want to build something again," he added, "smaller, kinder." "Then start by telling the truth," I said, "to the people who follow you and to yourself." He nodded like a man who'd heard a sentence he'd been waiting to say out loud. As for Gerald, he kept his word. No lawsuit, no saboteurs whispering behind closed doors. He did visit the regional office. He did review the situation. They gave raises. They halted the offshoring plan, but the victory felt hollow, like a bouquet delivered the day after the funeral. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The point had never been to watch them burn. The point was to find a place where I didn't have to keep proving I was on fire. At Vantage Tech, my days took on a new rhythm. I hired carefully, not just for skill, but for spine. I told my team what no one had told me when I started out. Your talent belongs to you. This company rents it by the hour. If we ever forget that, you remind us. We built playbooks that included not only escalation paths and decision matrices, but also rules about rest, about boundaries, about refusing emergencies that were just chronically poor planning in expensive suits. The surprising part, we performed better, clients stayed, people smiled more, burnout numbers dropped, revenue climbed. Turns out dignity is a force multiplier. One evening, after a long day that felt nothing like the old long days, I sat on the back steps with Lucas and watched the sky slouch into purple. He leaned against my shoulder, inhaler in his hoodie pocket, and asked, "Are you happy now?" I considered the question carefully. Happiness, I've learned, isn't a trophy, it's a practice. It's the way you stack moments, some bright, some dull, into a life that feels like it fits. "I'm at peace," I said, "and I'm proud." He nodded as if those were better than happy, as if he already understood that joy has roots and pride is what keeps the wind from knocking it over. The invitations started coming, podcasts, panels, leadership roundtables with names like Thriving Through Turbulence and The New Contract with Talent. I said yes to some, no to many. When I did speak, I told the truth the way I wish someone had told it to me. That loyalty without reciprocity is worship. That silence in the face of disrespect curdles into self-contempt. That the moment a company asks you to trade your dignity for security, they've already decided to leave you with neither. But the lesson that mattered most didn't fit on a slide. It was smaller, humbler, and it arrived one Tuesday morning when I was running late and spilled coffee on my blouse, and the printer jammed and Lucas couldn't find his left shoe. The old me would have dissolved into apologies and tight smiles and a day spent sprinting to cover a schedule built by ghosts. The new me took a breath, wiped the counter, found the shoe, changed the blouse, and walked into the office 5 minutes later than planned. The world did not end. The deal did not die. No one slid a paper across a desk. I had rebuilt my life to survive a human day lived by a human being. What do I want you to take from this story? Not the thrill of the showdown, though God knows there's a shiver in saying, "I quit," to a man whose power has always depended on your fear. Not the schadenfreude of watching the arrogant learn humility in the slow language of quarterly reports. Not even the applause that sometimes follows when you stand up in public and say, "Enough." I want you to hear the quiet things, like the way your heart steadies when you remember you are not an expense to be trimmed, you are a center of gravity, or the way your shoulders drop when someone in a position of authority says, "You were right," and you realize you didn't need their confirmation to know it. Or the sunrise quality of a morning where you pack a lunch for a child who trusts you'll be at the science fair, and you are. If I could go back to the woman in the parking garage, mascara smudged, lungs refusing to inflate, I would not tell her it will all be okay. That's too easy and not always true. What I would tell her is this: you are allowed to end stories that are killing you. You're allowed to insist on terms that honor your worth. You're allowed to walk toward the people who see you clearly and away from the ones who only see the line item. And I would tell her one more thing: revenge is not getting even, revenge is getting free. Months later, at Lucas's science fair, he stood by his trifold board and explained how oxygen enters the lungs, crosses into the blood, and becomes the energy that keeps us alive. His voice was confident and warm. He looked up at me and smiled mid-sentence, just a quick flash to make sure I was there. I was. Front row, clapping too loud. The ribbon they pinned to his board wasn't important. The air we were both breathing was. Afterward, while we were packing up, a boy from his class asked him what his mum did for work. Lucas answered without hesitation, proud as a flag in good wind. "She helps people not get pushed around." I laughed, then swallowed back a sting in my eyes. That's where the story lands. I think, not in boardrooms or balance sheets, not in the flame out of men who loved their reflections too much to notice the room was emptying. It lands in a child's description of a parent he watched fall, stand, and stay standing. It lands in a life redesigned not to impress the people who mistook me for furniture, but to serve the people who knew I was a person. So here is my final message, offered to you the way a hand is offered to someone still underwater. If you're in a place that treats your devotion like a liability, listen to the part of you that remembers sunlight. If a stranger in a sharp suit tells you your value has expired, remember that strangers don't get to define the currency of your life. If fear is the only reason you stay, let courage be the first reason you go. I won't pretend the path out is easy. It is not. It will ask you to grieve, to plan, to risk, to rebuild. It will ask you to accept that some bridges must be burned, not to destroy what's behind you, but to light the way forward. It will ask you to trust that your breath can become energy again. And when the paper slides across the desk, because in one form or another it always does, let that be the sound not of an ending, but of your beginning.